Alrighty, this is the Saturn in Aquarius square Uranus and Taurus video tutorial and lesson and entertainment and chit chat. Alright, so for those of you looking for light, fluffy, entertaining celebrity gossip, this is not the video for you. This is going to require some concentration and some focus, and it's got some heavy material in it. For those of you who are trying to learn, do yourself a favor, hit pause right now and go grab a pencil or pen and a piece of paper and your chart, something to drink, maybe something to snack on, and get comfortable, because this is there's a lot to go through here, and you're going to want to be able to set up your chart and look at it against the information we're presenting here. Okay, and that's it. I hope you guys enjoy it, and let's get started. I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so we're going to start with everybody's favorite, Uranus and Taurus. So we've all heard the conversations, you know, Uranus and Taurus, banking, finance, cryptocurrency, uh, which is all true. I'm not saying any of that is wrong, but I am saying that it's a little bit more subtle and sophisticated than just that. So with Taurus, remember, Taurus, among many things, is your resources. And resources are not only finances and currency. Resources are anything that you can trade, barter, or exchange with someone else to accomplish something. So, for example, way back in the day when the spice route was being done by ships traveling across the seas and oceans, spices were the currency, and spices were a very valuable resource that was used as a trading commodity, because for anybody like myself who wants flavor in my food, and you know, salt and pepper is not spicy, it's their necessities. You can see how spices would be a very valuable treasure and would have a lot of value in terms of exchange on a market, right? So there's that. And also, when we talk about resources, we're also talking about our food. We're talking about the fabric that we make clothes with. We're talking about the wood that we build houses with, the rubber we make tires out of. Anything that has value to other people that we can exchange for some type of goods or service, right? Make mutual exchange with, that we can commodify. That is a resource. Taurus also represents our values. So with Uranus and Taurus, one of the things that we can see is that we're going to have a very Uranian effect, or experience a very Uranian change with things that are associated with Taurus, which would be our physical resources. It would also be our value systems, and Taurus rules land management, property. And we've been having this conversation. So right now, soil conservation and land management and agricultural practices, and just being able to have enough food stuff to feed the globe, is a very important thing. That's going to be a critical conversation, because Uranus is the planet that rules stress tests. So Uranus is going to create a stress test while it's in Taurus, and until it leaves, which will be a very long time from now, in terms of not only our ability to manage our resources, but also to be more innovative and ingenious in terms of how we maximize our resources. Now, what I just said to you also applies to our personal lives. So that stress test that we're feeling out there, naturally, because we live here, not on another planet, we're also going to be experiencing it in our personal lives. So the stress test will be the same thing. How can we maximize our resources? How can we ingeniously find better ways to make things work better, right? How can we conserve and take care of and manage the resources and properties that we have in a way that's more effective, right? Not hoarding, which is a Taurus trait, and Capricorn as well, all the earth signs, but definitely Taurus. This hoarding. And the thing about it is, when we talk about hoarding in the sign Taurus, it's a dysfunctional expression of Taurus. So extremely rich people whose only ability is figuring out how the game is played so that they can hang on to whatever money they have and amass more of it and release as little as possible back to the society they live in, that in its own way is a form of hoarding, because at the end of the day, like, there's only so much money you can spend in a lifetime before it becomes redundant, right? So, and not wanting to share your resources is, you know, it's an act of selfishness, right? So, ooh, whole other conversation, Mr. Bezos and company. Okay. So we'll be seeing that a lot in our personal lives. We'll definitely be seeing it out in the external world, and we're definitely going to be seeing this as conversations that are coming up frequently, regularly, and as an ongoing source of aggravation and demand for change, whether we like it or not. So get used to having these conversations and get on board now so that you can stay ahead of the curve and it doesn't catch up from behind and bite you. All right. So with Uranus and Taurus, we're looking at things that challenge the existing status quo, right? Everything that's the way it's always been is now going to be turned upside down, and we're going to deal with a lot of that instability and unpredictability for a long time. But if you are actively engaged in trying to be innovative and ingenious and find new, flexible, better, undone before now, like ways of doing things, then this won't be a problem. This will actually be a great time because the doors will be open that will allow you the freedom you need to go experiment with better ways to do things. Uranus and Taurus is also culture shock, so we may find that there are a lot of abrupt, sudden changes in terms of our cultural values, right? Like literally social whiplash. So, you know, typically in cultures and with groups of people, these things gradually change, right? Society kind of takes a gradual, slow moving approach to doing things differently and adopting new values and new ways of looking at things and new perspectives. That will not be the case while Uranus is in Taurus. So we can expect fads to come in and out of fashion faster than ever before. We can expect some seriously bizarre stuff to pass through. The good thing, understand, Uranus is fast. So anything that's too bizarre to deal with and serves no functional purpose, it will leave as fast as it came in. So don't panic. Don't panic if your kids want to come home and suddenly have like these metal balls and what is surgically inserted under their skins. They look like they have little horns. It will pass. It will pass. Okay. Uranus and Taurus also is about reforming outworn and stubborn beliefs and values. So the things that no longer serve us, that are literally holding us back like anchors around our feet, you know, and threatening to pull us to the bottom of the ocean and drown us in the ocean of the past. Those are the things that we're finally going to be able to free ourselves from. And most importantly, the two keywords right now, when we think about Uranus and Taurus, both out there and in our personal lives, innovation versus extinction. If we're able to rise to the challenge of innovation, invention, we can accomplish amazing things. Or we can choose to fight it off as best we can, cling to the past, keep telling ourselves that somehow hanging on to what was and will never be again is somehow better, and like the dinosaurs, we can face extinction. With Uranus and Taurus, the lesson that we're going to learn, whether we like it or not, and whether we adapt to it or not, is that once you leave home, you can never go back again. Like, we have the memory of what home used to be like, but even if you go back, it's never the same thing because you're not the same person anymore. So that, my friends, is the first thing we want to think of when we think of Uranus and Taurus, and think of that when we frame that perspective, think about how we can frame that to our lives, because Uranus and Taurus is going to be with us for a long time, and this is what we're all going to be dealing with for a long time. So the sooner we can get a handle on making this work for us, the less traumatic, shocking, and upsetting this is going to be. And more important, the more productive, exciting, and liberating it will become. So there's that. Okay, Saturn in Aquarius. So luckily for all of us, it's only in Aquarius for a couple of years, then it's going to move on, right? And I'm a huge fan of Aquarius and Uranus. I'm not so much a fan of Saturn and Aquarius. And here's the reason why. Saturn in Aquarius tends to run to extremes, ideological extremes. With Aquarius, it's ruled by two planets. The ancient ruler is Saturn, the modern ruler is Uranus. Both of these planets are in a fixed sign, and fixed means stubborn, rigid, hard-headed, only wants to see one way, which is their way, and that's the right way, as far as they're concerned. And listen, if you have ever tried to have a conversation or an argument or a debate or convince an Aquarius of their wrongness on something, you know exactly how difficult it is to get these guys to change their mind about anything, because once they've made up their mind, that's it. Whew. Okay, so so there's that. And the other thing is that Saturn in Aquarius very much represents the culmination or the establishment of robotics and automation. Now, the thing about it is, robotics and automation have been increasing and becoming a force to be reckoned with in the labor markets for a long time. This is not new stuff. The auto manufacturers were the first ones, I think, to do mass production with robotics. So they've been refining and refining and refining and improving these things. With Saturn in Aquarius, this is going to come to the forefront, because now the challenge is that these automated systems and these robotics are going to, en masse, in large masses, start replacing service and labor jobs, putting a lot of people out of work, because nobody is getting the education that they need to be able to transition to other jobs, right? So literally we're taking away jobs and then leaving people to fend for themselves with nothing to do. Like, what are you going to grow a garden on your roof? Like, what are you going to do? So Saturn in Aquarius, over the next couple of years, could really, really draw a hard, clear line between the classes. Saturn in Aquarius is also about class systems and class warfare. So if there was ever any question about the haves and the have-nots, and the haves doing things that benefit the haves at the expense of the have-nots, like, it's all been theoretical for us here in the US anyway. If there's any question about how that worked, it's really going to hit home in the next couple of years. So hopefully you guys are paying attention, and you're paying attention to the people that you vote for, and that you actually vote, and you're paying attention to the votes and things that they sign off and agree to, because these things are important. Where I'm at, both of the representatives, the Democrat and Republican senator here, giant horses behinds, both voted against the $15 minimum wage, which people here desperately need, because 85% of the population around here is uneducated. 15% has white-collar jobs with college educations. They're not touched by this. And just remember something, just as a sidebar, and you can check yourself, it's true. All these people in Congress, they don't live lives like us. They're not touched by any of these things. So it's all academic for them. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's literally the equivalent of pushing little green toy army soldiers around on a table. That's how removed they are from the impact of the decisions they're making for us, about us. So when we're not paying attention and we're letting them sign off on whatever, you got to understand they're still human. So they're going to sign off on things that are easy for them and or benefit them. And do you know who benefits by having more automation and robotics in service and labor jobs? People who own those businesses and companies, and people who own stocks in those businesses and companies. Because when you remove the people and you replace them with machines, you've now eliminated a tremendous source of cost: insurance, disability, tuition reimbursement, accidental death and disability, yada, yada, unemployment. Like, the list goes on and on and on and on about the cost of having humans working for you. And machines never need breaks. They don't get sick. They don't need sick time. Once they, go kablooey, that's it. There's no lawsuit. There's no insurance. There's no medical care. You just replace a new machine. And for every 20 machines, you have one person that you need to maintain them, as opposed to 20 people doing the jobs. So understand that when we talk about robotics and automation, without giving people transitional education and skills so that they can go on and do other work, other meaningful work, to replace the jobs that they're going to lose, all this automation and robotics, the only person it benefits are the business owners and the people who own stocks in those companies at the highest end, at the very, very highest end. So there's that. And Saturn in Aquarius, humanity is easier to love than humans. So there's a detachment that comes with Saturn in Aquarius, where they like the idea of humanity, but the actual individual human beings they really struggle with, right? Now that's very Aquarian to begin with. There's a very good Russian writer, and in one of his books, The Brothers Dostoevsky, there's a line where the officer says something to the effect of, "I love humanity, it's the individuals I hate." And that's a very Aquarian statement. With Saturn in Aquarius, this becomes even more pronounced because all of our differences really become sharp relief or very visible and very clear. So seeing differences and seeing where we're different, where we don't fit in with each other socially easily, is even more pronounced. People who carry Saturn in Aquarius in their natal charts know very well what I'm talking about. They often suffer from social anxiety because they're painfully aware of where they don't fit with other people, and certainly where other people don't fit with them, right? So in a natal chart, they're very familiar with this feeling. In this chart, with a mundane chart, talking about all of us together, we're all more painfully aware of where we don't fit easily with each other, but we don't necessarily have the tolerance, because Saturn in Aquarius is not tolerant. We don't necessarily have the tolerance to let these things go or find a way to work around them. Okay, and the cost of progress, robotics and automation versus not giving people transitional education and skills for jobs that you're not going to have anymore. And also, too, with Saturn in Aquarius, we're looking at two things, right? And this is where a lot of the kooky, like QAnon crazy people are coming from. Literally a perfectly good waste of 12 years of education. I don't know how these people happened. So it is literally, with Saturn in Aquarius, it is the lowest common denominator, because Aquarius represents the masses, the great teeming unwashed masses. And Saturn is excrement, dirt, filth. It's things at street level. Literally, Saturn in Aquarius can represent the lowest common denominator, right? This is the lowest low point you can go with anything. And on the other side of that, it also represents exceptionalism, because Saturn also represents the highest level you can achieve with something, the maximum level of exceptionalism, right? The gold standard that you would measure by. So Saturn in Aquarius over the next couple of years is going to bring into sharp relief, very, very clear and visible, the lowest of the low and the highest of the high. Which end of these we go towards in our personal lives, our character, our decisions, that is going to be up to us. But ultimately, it's one or the other, and it'll be a fast ride in either direction. So make your choices appropriately, because integrity comes under Saturn in Aquarius. So we'll be seeing a lot of questions and issues about integrity and ethics. Okay. And also, interestingly enough, Saturn in Aquarius, one of the things we're also going to see more of for the next couple of years, we've been seeing it on the rise, but it's really going to hit home and really like come down like a hammer, are going to be matters of, or issues of, mass surveillance and mob control. So, you know, we've seen a lot of this authoritarian rise and all sorts of stuff that's been going on across the globe, not just the United States. And it's a little worrisome, right? But for the next couple of years, while Saturn is in Aquarius, we can look for more focused activity and efforts by a small group of people in terms of controlling large groups of people. So keep an eye on that, and remember, pay attention to the people you are giving your support for, to put in positions to make decisions about how we can live our lives. Because at the end of the day, they're not living by the same rules they're making for us. And if you don't believe me, you're going to see it in the next couple of years. We're seeing it now, and it's just going to get more clear and obvious over the next 2 years. All right, now make sure you've got your chart out and your paper and your pencil. You've got your little drink and you're comfy, all right, because now we're getting some interactive stuff. So, you know, there's this, when you're setting up a booby trap, you know, right? What? Where'd that come from? When you're setting up a booby trap, or when you're out hunting, I'm pretty sure the hunters do this too. They will often set up like these hidden traps, right? With this line that runs low to the ground, like you're looking at in this picture, and it's called a tripwire. So the idea is that you don't see it, and it's only triggered when you're close enough to it that you actually pretty much walk into it, and you push against the string or the line, and that sets off the trap, you know, which is clearly not immediately in front of you, but certainly near enough by and aimed at you, right? So that's a tripwire. Very ingenious thing that these human beings do. Now, the reason this picture is here, and the reason I'm saying this, is because This particular this particular Saturn-Uranus square with the eclipse that we just came out from under is very important. This eclipse is the tripwire for the Saturn-Uranus square. And there's a whole lot of math in here. Anyway, just trust me when I tell you that. So the eclipse will be in effect for 6 months. So I'm putting this video together now, and I'm putting it out now because we've got 6 months to navigate this with as few bumps, bruises, scratches, and scars possible. So this is a very delicate operation over the next 6 months in our personal lives. And the more you know, the easier it's going to be able to get through this with your sanity intact and with a bonus prize at the end. And I don't know about you, but I'm all about the bonus prize and not about the bruises. So tripwires. The eclipse set up a tripwire with this Saturn-Uranus square. So we are feeling it right now. And there's a specific point in your chart I need you guys to watch so that you can figure out how to navigate this. So let's get started. All right, so the trip point, or the point where the trip wire is a degree called 24 Pisces. So 24 degrees Pisces is what I want you to find in your chart. Now, here's the thing. If you have your time of birth, then you can find out easily where 24 Pisces is going to be in your wheel. If you don't know your time of birth, it's okay, because we just need to know what house it's sitting in and if it's affecting any other planets. So if you don't know what time you're born, use your sun sign, and we're going to use the following table below. So for the following signs: Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, sun sign or rising sign, your trip point is 24 Pisces. And for the Geminis, it will be in the 10th house, or the house of profession, career, public standing, your reputation in the world. With the Virgos, it will be in your 7th house, which is going to be open enemies and committed legal partners. With Sagittarius, it will be in your 4th house of home and tribe and family, right? And also real estate. And with Pisces, it will be in your 1st house. So the house of identity and the physical body and, you know, the great I am. So if you're any of these signs, go ahead and pause the video and go ahead and mark it on your chart. If you're any of the cardinal signs, this is where this 24 Pisces trip point is going to be. If you are in Aries, Aries rising or Aries sun, it will be in your 12th house of mental health, hospitalization, all your unconscious, subconscious stuff, right? How the great house of self-undoing. But ultimately, the 12th house is about charity, volunteer work, and mental health. So that's where you're going to be feeling it. Cancer or Cancer rising, it will be in your 9th house, which is higher education, legal affairs, and or people at a distance, long distance sort of stuff, you know. Yeah, Sagittarius things. Teaching, higher education, long distance travel, legal things, anything involving the courts and the law, as well as, and publishing also comes under the 9th house. And if you are Libra sun or Libra rising, this trip point will fall in your 6th house of physical hygiene. So your day-to-day routines and environment, your physical health, your habits, if you don't have a career that you're in love with, it's the jobs that you do as a matter of service and drudgery. And or if you have employees or servants, they also will be coming into the 6th house, and this is where you'll be feeling it. For Capricorn or Capricorn rising, it will fall in your 3rd house. So it will be siblings, the immediate neighborhood, communications and documents, and which includes your phones and text messages, and siblings. Did I say siblings? I think I said siblings. And also cars and travel. So you'll be feeling this in those areas of your life. And for those of you who are of the fixed sign, this 24 Pisces trip point will fall. If you're an Aquarius, it will fall in your 2nd house of finances and resources. As a Taurus house. So the 2nd house is finances, resources. It's also the house of self-esteem. So there's a lot to do with personal values and priorities that are going to come up with this trip point in Pisces for you. If you're a Scorpio or Scorpio sun, this will fall in your 5th house. So this will be either children, biological children, It will be love affairs if you're out dating, not your marriage partner, but your other partners. And also creativity and creative expression. So for those of you who are performers or involved in some type of creative work, even crafty people, this is also what will come under that. And those of you who are in speculative things like stocks and investments, this is the fifth house, so you'll be feeling it there, which is kind of a scary, dicey thing to consider when we also take into consideration the fact that Uranus is in Taurus. So things that have to do with resources and investment are literally all over the place like a roller coaster. So having this trip point in my house of financial speculation would make things even more hair-raising for me. But I'm not a speculative investor, so maybe you've got nerves of steel that I don't. If you're Leo rising or Leo sun, this trip point is going to occur in your 8th house. So the 8th house covers a wide range of things, but things that I would look for have to do with insurance and insurance policies, also investments, or the support of other people. So politicians and kept spouses, people who are kept by their partners in a life of luxury, my aim in life. Also, the 8th house has a lot to do with surgery. And goods of the dead, things that have to do with dealing with the death and dying process, not your own, other people's. Well, maybe your own. But these are the things that will come up under the 8th house where you will be feeling this trip point. And if you're a Taurus or a Taurus sun, the trip point will be in your 11th house. Now, the 11th house is a little bit tricky, I got to tell you guys, because on the one hand, you're already dealing with Uranus in your sign, which is, enough. Oh my God, it's enough, right? And Saturn squaring it, which is essentially squaring its own ruler, which is making things even more complicated and unnerving, right? So you're already getting like double duty here with this Saturn-Uranus square. And now you've got the trip point in Aquarius's house, which is the 11th house. So I'm not going to say you're going to have a good time, but I will say this is only going to last for 6 months. So if you can get through the next 6 months, you're going to be golden. It's just getting you through the next 6 months, right? Okay. So here's the scary part. You might want to go get yourself a drink or a Valium or something before you listen to this. So the 11th house is the house of unexpected circumstances and complete random strangers and large groups of people that you don't personally know. I know, right? So I mean, basically for the next 6 months, it's gonna be like getting onto a subway and being like crushed in a subway by a bunch of random strangers or an elevator. And the elevator stops or the subway, screeches to a halt. No, I'm being dramatic, but it really is. There are a lot of surprising and unexpected circumstances that are going to come out of left field and lots of random people that you're going to be dealing with during the next 6 months. And that's where you're going to be feeling this eclipse, because you couldn't be any more like destabilized without it, right? You just needed this. Now, here's the good news though, and this you'll be happy to hear. The 11th house also rules income, unexpected windfalls. So it is also entirely possible, my friend, that you could be the happy and unexpected recipient of a windfall of money, whether it's a $20 bill in the street or a $3 million winning lottery ticket. I don't personally advise gambling. And so let's just be clear here. I don't personally advise it, but do not rule out the possibility that the winds of change and lady luck and fate are also just as much working in your favor as these seem to be working against it these days. So take heart, my friend. It's not all bad news. It's just unexpected. Okay, so let's look at this eclipse and let's look at the trip point in context of the eclipse, right? So this eclipse, get my little pen here. This eclipse, oh wait, that's not what I want. Sorry. This eclipse, this is set for Washington, D.C., so you can adjust this for wherever you're at, and we're not going to worry about the houses as much as just the planet. So this eclipse also involved, in case you missed it, Mercury in its own sign of rulership, which made the eclipse even more powerful, and I'm sure many of you have the horror stories to tell about everything going haywire that would come under Mercury's rulership. Cars, communications, computers, documents, data, cell phones. I know I've got my stories. And at the same time that this is happening, look at this. it was also squaring Neptune. I mean, this was just the big double whammy here. Wow, right? Talk about the universe having a sense of humor. Not funny, McGee, not funny. So this was a super powerful wallop of an eclipse. Now, with that said, we've got this Saturn-Uranus square that's been happening simultaneously. So on the surface, it doesn't look like it doesn't mean anything, right? They're not really related. You know, I mean, they share a solar system, but you know, it's kind of like second cousins. You may share a couple of relatives in the family tree, but that doesn't mean anything, right? Well, here's the thing though. So if we look at the midpoint between Saturn and Uranus, guess what? The midpoint, or our trip point, sits right here, 15 to 17, give or take, depending on where Saturn and Uranus are at any given time. So we're calling it 15 just to be on the safe side. 15 Pisces. Well, what's near 15 Pisces? Neptune. Neptune at 23 Pisces. Now, you know I like tight orbs. I don't like big sloppy orbs, but Neptune also, like Mercury's in its sign of rulership, Neptune is in its sign of rulership, making it super duper powerful as well. So for this eclipse, we had two planets in their own sign of rulership, making them magnificently supercharged. Unfortunately, because Neptune was involved, it also created all sorts of chaos and confusion and, you know, cluster, blah, blah, blah. and with that said, right, the trip point for the midpoint between Saturn and Uranus is now here, right, on top of that Neptune, which squared that eclipse. So this eclipse is basically energizing, and because Neptune is there, right, it's energizing that midpoint. So that is how we've come to the determination for a trip point for this particular square. Now, I wouldn't use this formula with everything, but in this particular case, because remember, astrology is all about combinations of things, right? It's not one or two isolated aspects. So in this particular situation for the next 6 months, this is how we've come to this decision and this business about this trip point appearing right there. So there you go. there's your math. You need me to show you my math, there's your math. But here's the thing, like, well, now we know all this, what do we do with it, right? So I'm not a huge fan of data dumps either. So we're going to use some actual real life examples that we can follow in the news. Now, remember this guy, this is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, before we go into this, I just want to say my caveat, I don't actually know that much about this man. And I only know very superficially what's going on over in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine. I'm at a deficit for actual knowledge, and just so we're clear, this video in the comment section is not for debate about those things. So if you want to educate people, that's awesome. Please put citations in with your comments, or the comments are going to be removed. If you can't give me citations to an article or some type of reference to support what you're saying, it's going to be removed. This is not the place for a debate. So there. Okay. Anyway. Benjamin Netanyahu apparently is a very powerful figure in the Middle East, and he was in, as the little thing here says, 12 years. 12 years he was in control of Israel and making decisions for them. So he's a pretty big deal, and loved and hated, I suppose, in extreme ways. Now, when we look at the chart, what do we see? All right, so this is Benjamin Netanyahu's chart with his information, and one of the first things that we see is he's got and this is his personal natal chart, right? He's got a giant T-square being set up with this Saturn and Uranus. So Saturn and Uranus are here. This is their square, right? And remember, T-squares are amplifiers. So that T-square amplifier for that square across his chart is his personal Pluto. So what that means is that the evolutionary challenge that he would have been dealing with as soon as Saturn and Uranus entered a square with each other and moved in position, and in particular here, because his Pluto's at 17. So this recent eclipse really drove the nail into the coffin where his Pluto is concerned. So Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto as a configuration typically makes people extremely controlling. If you were controlling before, you're going to be out of control controlling now. Also, too, it's a very, this combination of planets, Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto, is very unsentimental and very cold and often very cruel, because they're so detached from their humanity and other people's feelings and, you know, things like compassion, you know, and grace and charity. They're so divorced from all of that. Their ability to be cruel as an academic exercise is unparalleled. So this is a really tough combination to have. Luckily, he doesn't carry it in his natal chart. It's not his nature to be that description. However, with Saturn and Uranus coming together and pulling in that Pluto of all things as part of this T-square amplifier, we're definitely seeing that being brought out in him. And I don't know, so clearly I have to go back and look to read up on the history, but based on what we've been hearing just recently in the outcries against, even from the Israelis, and the American Jews, about the business going on with Palestine recently, that absolutely describes that Saturn-Uranus-Pluto combination that we're seeing that's showing up in his chart. So all of the worst of him being brought to the surface. Now, what does that tell us about the trip point, though, right? Yeah, that's what we're here for, okay? So the trip point for him sits down here. This is actually really interesting. I think you'll like this. Sits right down here in his fourth house. So everybody's fourth house, yours, mine, and everybody else's. The fourth house is the house of family and home. It's also the house of your tribe, the people that you see as part of your tribal family, you know, if you have such a thing, right? The kids are real big about using the word tribe these days, you know, find your tribe. So and remember, this kicks off, it's already kicked off with the eclipse, and it's going on for the next 6 months, right? So what happened under the eclipse? Well, what happened is he got removed from office as the prime minister. Now, if you look, this trip point involves his personal Saturn on the midheaven. So the planet on the midheaven, regardless of the planet, that trip point activating the midheaven and a planet right there on the midheaven indicates that this would not only be a very public activity or experience or event, but it would also be something that involves his public status, his relationship with society around him. And obviously, he was removed from office. He's lost his status in terms of the society he lives in, right, or the environment that he lives in. Now, with Saturn there, Saturn as the planet that's on that midheaven, that's pulling in that trip point, we know that Saturn is also karma, consequences, or repercussions. Pick your word. They're all the same thing. So we also know that anything that he has earned at this point is going to be coming back to him. Now, had he done karmically good things, I would imagine, we don't know because this is not the way things have played out, but it is entirely possible that had he done more meritorious things for the progress and good of his tribe, right, moving forward in terms of evolution, it's possible that he should have or would have gotten rewarded for this. He would have gotten an elevation in status, because remember, Saturn is also the gold standard, right? It's the highest expression of excellence for things. So it's entirely possible that this could have gone the other way. Unfortunately, it did not. So what we are seeing is this, right? The Saturn-Pluto combination that he has been working with for quite some time, you know, coming to culmination with a removal from office that resulted in a loss of status, both in the environment or society that he lives in, but also I would imagine, because Saturn is involved and also because it's coming out of his fourth house of tribe, that this feels like a very, very deep betrayal for him. So in many ways, he may feel like he's been betrayed by his own people. How's that? Okay, so this chart's gonna be a little tricky to look at, so let me just walk you through this real quick. So the first thing to understand is that we are using the US Constitution chart rather than the 1776 Independence Day chart. And the reason I'm using the Constitution chart is there's a very good astrologer who does mundane astrology and does a lot of, there's a whole bunch of them, mostly men, because I don't know what it is with guys in history, right? But they're all into history and they do some astrology, and this particular gentleman decided to try using the USA Constitution chart, and we're all finding, well, those of us who are looking at it are finding that he is correct, and the timing seems to be much more sensitive and accurate with things going on. So, and he has a whole long explanation about why he decided this is the better chart to use than the 1776 Independence Day chart, which I don't remember the details of, so I won't try to repeat it because I won't be able to do it justice. But it was a very good, long thought out argument. And again, at the end of the day, the timing works. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this is what's called a bi-wheel. So it is two wheels, right? So we've got an inner chart, all this marking, I know, and we've got a second chart on the outer ring around it. So the chart, the circle on the inside represents the United States Constitution. That's the chart for the Constitution for this country. The ring on the outside out here is actually the planetary positions for the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Now, I don't want to rehash this because it's just an unpleasant thing. However, there were some really fascinating things that came up when I looked at this, and I want to share it with you because, wow, astrology rocks, right? Okay, so first, let's start with the Constitution chart and the Insurrection. So the first thing is, with the United States, one of the things that's happening with this Saturn-Uranus square that we're all dealing with, the whole point of this video, right, is that it is involving the United States Pluto, or the Pluto in the United States chart. Okay? So, with that said, because remember, Saturn and Uranus is about reforming, innovating, right? The stone breaker. That's what I wanted to mention also too. With Saturn and Uranus together, what you have is a stone breaker. You have two elements that come together that are able to break stone. So, for instance, if you have to go through a mountain, like you've seen these roads that become tunnels that go through mountains, in order to do that, you have to be able to blast through the mountain. And in order to blast through the mountain, you have to be careful, you have to be controlled, you have to be precise, and there's a tremendous amount of explosive power that needs to occur in measured form, right? Deliberate, well thought out, well calculated measured form to be able to blast through rock and stone inside a mountain to build a tunnel with without everything collapsing down on top of you. So with Saturn and Uranus together, this is the kind of, like that samurai sword, this is the kind of activity that does well, that we can expect with this. Now, with Saturn and Uranus square involving the United States Pluto, that means that our country and everything that it is built on, because we are not a monarchy, we're not an autocracy, we are a democracy. Everything that we are built on is under huge evolutionary challenge, because remember, Uranus is always the stress test. Whether it's a person with strong Uranus in their chart, or an event, or a transit, whatever it is, where Uranus shows up, it is the giant stress test. It's like the Dennis the Menace of the Zodiac. So with Uranus and Saturn involved with that Pluto, everything this country is built on is under a giant stress test. The other thing is that, remember, Saturn and Uranus, it's the lowest common denominator or the highest gold standard. So we will either find ourselves sinking to the lowest common denominator, you know, Jewish space lasers, you know, setting forest fires. Oi, Italy, you know, messing around with the voting machines to affect the election. Oh my God. Or we will rise up to the gold standard by which everything else is measured by. But it will not be easy, and it has to be handled very, very specifically, just like when you're blasting through stone in a mountain to try and build a tunnel through it. So we're at the beginning of this, and we're definitely starting to see the cracks in the foundation, but that's okay because it's showing us where the weak points are. So that's your good news. Take heart, dear friends, take heart. We will get through this and we will be stronger and better than ever. You know, or we're just going to collapse like a Roman circus of senators from Caligula's day. But I don't think that's going to happen, because if we were going to become another version of Caligula, we'd have already been there by now. We certainly have plenty of senators in office who are leading the charge on that one, and they're not getting very far with it. Bless all of you. Okay, so now let's get back to our trip point. Remember, the trip point is in Pisces. Well, what is this trip point doing? Here's what's interesting. So the trip point is down here, right? And it sits on the fourth house, in the fourth house of the US chart. What that means is that the very foundation, on which this country is built and stands and has as a group identity is where the trip point is hitting. So we're definitely having an identity crisis right now. We are definitely having an identity crisis. Now, let's take a look at that. So, and ignore that Neptune, because that's not ours. That's the insurrection chart. So this trip point, right, is it doing anything? Well, yes, it is. Look at that. It is opposing Mercury and Venus at the very top of the chart. So Mercury has a lot to do with details, the very, very specific conditions and words and terms and techniques. Remember, we're blasting through a mountain. You don't just willy-nilly set explosives off. Detailed, thorough, deliberate, well-calculated, measured actions. That is what we're looking at. And Venus in Virgo is all about the details and getting it just right, so you only have to do it once, maybe twice. So with the trip point for this eclipse, remember this is in effect for the next 6 months, getting things just exactly right and as close to perfect as possible in execution is exactly what we're about for the next 6 months in this country. So we're heading in the right direction. I know it doesn't seem like it because everything's so messy, but honest to God, we're heading in the right direction. So all of the dust that's being kicked up, all the noise and mess and kerfluffle that we're dealing with as this stuff like the cockroaches coming out, scattering from the walls, it's okay because it's showing us where the problems are so we can go in and finally seal up those cracks once and for all. So we're heading to a good place. I have confidence. Now, with that said, now remember down here this little Neptune? So that's the Neptune in the insurrection chart, which I thought was kind of interesting. So the Neptune in the insurrection chart is also opposing the United States, Mercury, and Venus, right? And, what do we know about the Neptune? Neptune as a planet often rules confusion, ambiguity, lack of clarity, confusion. It also rules crazy people, derelicts, drunks, drug addicts, people who are like, 3 sheets of the wind, dealing with four cards out of a full deck. And it also rules, grace and charity, people who, like the Mother Teresa's of the world, people who give and go and do selflessly and sacrifice themselves for the greater good, and try to alleviate suffering, not cause more of it. Now, clearly with the insurrection, these people were not trying to alleviate anybody's suffering except their own, and they were definitely trying to cause more suffering for other people. So I would definitely say that in terms of a Neptune expression, they were the lowest common denominator, like the lowest of the low expression for Neptune, rather than the gold standard. Just saying. And here is the chart for the insurrection. So here we have the trip point right here, right, on that Neptune for the insurrection. So right there it tells us this whole eclipse activity and the insurrectional sort of stuff, like this is where it's happening, right? Now this did occur before the eclipse hit. So let me just clarify in case somebody takes issue with this. So the insurrection occurred before the eclipse hit. However, the eclipse occurred and triggered or set off, right, that trip point. Now, with that said, what that also means, because Neptune is here, okay, and it's involved in this T-square, right, and it's connecting to the USA Constitution chart. What I would hazard a guess and say is that because the trip point sits on that Neptune, which is involved in T-square, which is connected to the USA chart, that we should see this business with it's not over yet. I don't care what the senators did or didn't do. It's not over yet. And we should see this ramp up and come to some type of official culmination within 6 months. Now, while this is happening, one of the other things that I thought was interesting is Neptune also rules scapegoats and victims, real ones and imagined ones. And what I would expect, especially with the nodes involved, is for this particular group, these people involved in it, I expect to see a whole lot of people getting thrown under the bus, which is unfortunate. I mean, they should be held accountable for their actions, but at the same time, They're not the only people responsible for this, so they will be thrown under the bus so somebody else can save themselves, and that's the bad part. The other is that there's going to be a whole lot of victimhood going on, a whole lot of it wasn't my fault, and I didn't understand, and it's, you know, it was somebody else to blame, and I was under the influence of. There's going to be a whole lot of playing the victim where this situation is concerned, along with the scapegoating. Or it could be one or the other, but scapegoating and or victimhood will be big keywords as this insurrection finishes itself out over the next 6 months. Now, with this insurrection also too, look at this. So they've got Saturn and Jupiter squaring Uranus from the 1st and the 10th. So this would represent the event itself. So Saturn and Jupiter together in the 10th house of this chart, because remember, Jupiter and Saturn are the maximal expression of our identity, where we connect with society. So Saturn and Jupiter together would indicate a unified thought or an agreement in mass consciousness that this whole activity was about the greater good. They literally have convinced themselves that this was for the greater good. Much like Netanyahu believes that everything he's done from his heart for the love of his people. And I'm sure that's genuinely where he was coming from when he's done everything he's done. However, that doesn't necessarily suit the evolutionary need of the group moving forward, and hence Netanyahu has been removed. In this particular case, same kind of situation where there's an ideology that everybody as a group, as a whole, believe that they're doing for the greater good. Because it is squaring Uranus, again, it's a stress test. And because Uranus is in the 1st house, it's going to be very difficult for them to get support and maintain it, because they come off like a bunch of kooks. Because Uranus in the 1st house, if you are somebody with Uranus in the 1st house, one of the things you should know by now if you're an adult is that people always think you're a little weird. It's very difficult to get support from people when they're terrified of you, because they never know what direction you're coming from. And this is just when you're standing there breathing. So the thing with Uranian energy is Uranian energy makes people uncomfortable, and it makes people uncomfortable because there's this element of surprise or unexpected. There's this hum of energy around Uranian people, and you're never really completely sure what's going on in that head of theirs, you know, or what direction they're coming from, or where they're going to go next, because their brain is constantly going, but it's going at a different level, in a different way, on a higher plane or a different plane, because Uranus is a transpersonal planet. So they're here but not really here. It's a weird kind of thing dealing with Uranian people, but you'll know it when you deal with them. So with Uranus in the 1st house squaring Saturn Jupiter in the insurrection chart, these guys literally just came across to the world, you know, not just the local tribe, but the world at large as a bunch of kooks. So at the end of the day, before the 6 months are out, it's going to be very difficult for them to get any sympathy or support from other people, because just, Jesus, they look like a bunch of wackadoodles. And one of the things that we did see almost immediately afterwards were literally friends and family turning their crazy behinds in, because, geez Louise, they really were crazy, right? Oy, and antisocial, That's the other thing with Saturn-Uranus. Sorry, I almost forgot. With Saturn-Uranus combinations, you can also get a bit of antisocial behavior with that, or an antisocial element. Now, in a natal chart for an individual, if they have Saturn-Uranus, it could just as easily be circumstances and situations as they come up through life that create an antisocial type of temperament. It does not mean when you're looking at a chart that this person is de facto and automatically going to be antisocial. Remember, we are just as much products of our environment as we are of our genetics. So don't blindly label people with these awful assigned labels until you really understand where this is coming from and how they may have been experiencing it. Okay, now here's the good stuff. There is, this is so good. There is a fixed star rising right here, and it's called Kurda, and it's in the constellation Cepheus. And I want to read you, you're going to love this, I want to read you what is said about the constellation Cepheus. Now, if you're interested in fixed stars, I would recommend a website called Constellation of Words. It is a fantastic resource for fixed stars and reading about them. I would personally not go to Astrology King, because he has literally plagiarized everything from Constellation of Words, and I'm very sensitive to integrity in everything, but especially this field. So that's why I recommend you stay away from him and go directly to the source, which is constellation of words. Okay, so the fixed star Corda influences. According to Ptolemy, Cepheus is like Saturn and Jupiter. It gives authority and a sober mind, sometimes making its natives judges or arbitrators, but exposes to cruel and severe trials. Does that not sound like this entire group who decided they were going to be judge and jury and storm the Capitol? If Mars afflicts the luminaries from Cepheus, which in this case it does, especially if in an angle, which it also is, it causes death by, are you ready for this? It causes death by hanging, decapitation, crucifixion, or impalement. And what did these characters do? They took a noose, they were hanging it up, they were trying to, they were threatening to hang Mike Pence. Impalement, they took one of the flagpoles and like beat this guy to death. I'm sure they would have stabbed him with it if they could have gotten away with it. And the poor security guard caught in the doorway, they nearly beheaded him with the damn door. Ooh. By the Kabbalists, this constellation is associated with the Hebrew letter Shin and the 22nd tarot trump, the Fool. Robson, page 37. Cepheus will not engender dispositions inclined to sport. He fashions faces marked by a stern demeanor and molds a countenance whereon is depicted gravity of mind. Such men will live on worry and will incessantly recall the traditions of a bygone age and commend old Cato's maxims. Cepheus will also create a man to bring up boys of tender age. He will lord it over his lord by virtue of the law which governs a minor, and, bemused by this semblance of power, will mistake for reality the role of arrogant guardian or stern uncle which he plays, which is also exactly how they're behaving. Offspring of Cepheus, those influenced astrologically by Cepheus, will also furnish words for the buskin of tragedy, whose pen, if only on paper, is drenched in blood, and the paper no less will revel in the spectacle of crime and catastrophe in human affairs. Literally, this describes what we were watching. Offspring of Cepheus, those influenced astrologically by Cepheus, will also furnish words for the buskin of tragedy, whose pen, if only on paper, is drenched in blood, and the paper, the audience at a performance, no less will revel in the spectacle of crime and catastrophe in human affairs. Wow, right? They will delight to tell of scarce one burial accorded three. Thyestes unwittingly ate his 3 sons, whom, their extremities cut off, his brother Atreus served up to him as a meal. The burial, incomplete because the sons were not completely eaten, took place in the father's stomach. Cicero, who perhaps quotes the Atreus of Accius, the father belching forth the flesh of his sons, the son fled in horror and the darkness of a cloudless day. They will delight to narrate the Theban war between a mother's issue and one who is both father and brother to his children. The story of Medea's sons, her brother and her father, the gift which was first robe and then consuming flame, the escape by air and youth reborn from fire. 1,000 other scenes from the past will they include in their plays, and perhaps Cepheus himself will also be brought up on stage. And it goes on with some stuff referencing on stage he will take part of Romans or the mighty heroes of myth. He will assume every role himself, one after the other, and in his single person represent a crowd. He will draw over his limbs the aspect of fortune's every vicissitude, and his gestures will match the songs of the chorus. He will convince you that you see Troy's actual fall and Priam expiring before your very eyes. Meaning he will convince you of things that are not actually happening because it benefits him. And this is literally what we were watching with his lunatic fringe terrorizing, our capital and trying to destroy it. Corda in the constellation of words. Wow. Okay, so this is the chart. Here we go. This is the chart for the Republic of China. On the left, it is the national chart, or the chart for the country. On the right is a picture of their president, Xi Jinping, or Xi Jinping, I'm not completely sure how to pronounce that, who is president for life. Now, he is president for life because apparently in 2018 they wrote legislature that removed all term limits, which allows him to serve until he dies. So the chart that you see on the left is the chart that we're working with forever, unless and until the Republic of China reincorporates itself or gets a new leader and starts all over again from scratch. Xi Jinping is also the leader we will be dealing with until, well, you know, he dies. So you can imagine where some people got the idea that they want to be president for life too. Anyway, with the nation of China, the first thing is we've got this Saturn-Uranus. Let me get this out of here. We've got this Saturn-Uranus. Why is this doing this? I'm so sorry. We've got this Saturn-Uranus square. There we go. Okay, in their chart. It's coming out of the 1st and the 3rd. So with Uranus in the 1st, because remember Uranus is always a stress test, wherever it shows up, and Uranus in the 1st is a stress test about their national identity, which they're certainly and clearly continuing to go through, and maybe now more than ever. But it's hard to say because we don't get that information. And the reason we're not getting that information is because Saturn is in the 3rd, and Saturn is will clamp down and restrict things. So Saturn in the 3rd is absolutely about restricting or restraining communications for the masses. So there's a whole lot of information that they are not going to get up off of as they try to work through this identity crisis that they're having. So things may be a lot more weird over there than we thought they were. Now also too, I know that they were having some issues with Hong Kong because Great Britain lost their lease on Hong Kong a few years ago, and there's been a fight to get them back under China rule and to no longer be an independent country from them or an independent state from them. And that's led to its own issues, which have been ongoing. But again, we're not hearing a lot because the Saturn in that 3rd has really put the big wall of silence on that sort of stuff. Now, here's what's interesting about their chart. This Saturn-Uranus square that we're working with actually sets up a giant grand cross in their chart. So the grand cross is incredibly dynamic and difficult. In their particular case, because I don't have 3 hours to go over this, and I'm sure you don't want to hang around for all of that, but in their particular case, with this particular configuration involving all fixed signs and Scorpio and then Pluto and Mars and Saturn and Uranus, everything going on with China right now moving forward, unless something significant changes, and certainly especially over the next 6 months, has everything to do with domination, control, and power, not just of themselves, but also mass domination, control, and power on a global scale. This is not unusual. All countries and nations and governments do this. They are not exceptional or alone in this. The difference is the push is really on for them. They're under tremendous evolutionary crisis right now, and one of the things that's being affected is, how they handle power, the use and abuse of power and control. So they're really on the ropes in terms of their evolution, their social evolution, with these issues. And Saturn in Aquarius in the 3rd house absolutely has to do with controlling the masses and their communications. So mass surveillance, mass control, mass censorship, like Saturn. As long as Saturn's in Aquarius for the next couple of years, it's really going to come down hard and clamp shut a lot of information. Any information that we're not getting about Myanmar is nothing compared to what's not coming out of China. So that's a little frightening. Thank God we don't live there. Okay, now let's come back to what we're here for, and that is the trip point. So the trip point in this chart sits here, right, on their 2nd house, which means that over the next 6 months, their resources, their money, their finances, their ability to sustain themselves, their financial decisions are going to be highlighted in a huge way. It's going to be very, very telling and important as they navigate through this. They've really got to get their values, because remember, it's the 2nd house, the house of values. They've really got to get their values on straight to get through this with the least amount of damage. Now, here's what's interesting. This trip point for them, look at this. It's opposing their natal Saturn. Does this sound familiar? Didn't we just talk about somebody who had a trip point opposing their Saturn? Right, it was Netanyahu. Netanyahu, in his personal individual chart, took this trip point to his Saturn on the 10th house. And what happened? He was ousted from government. He lost his 12-year tenure as the leader of Israel, which is a tremendous, for him, because it's coming out of the 4th house, was a tremendous blow, and maybe even felt like a betrayal. But ultimately, it was his report card, his evolutionary report card. And it was not a happy ending. Now, the thing to remember, again, I'll say it again, Saturn is, in this particular case with Saturn Aquarius especially, Saturn will represent the lowest of the low, or the gold measure, the gold standard that we measure by. It's one extreme or the other. So with China, it could be one or the other. China could be like end up really the lowest of the low end of outcomes in terms of their national finances, or they could do something superlative and end up being the gold standard by which other countries measure themselves by. Hard to say which is going to be, but whatever it is, they will certainly have earned it. So let's keep an eye on them and see how that plays out over the next 6 months. And here we go. Who's your buddy? Who's your pal? Mr. Vladimir Putin. Interestingly, he's not actually an attractive man. He's a funny looking guy, but he's very photogenic, and he's got, if you look, he's got Spica rising, so he's got 23 Libra rising on the ascendant, which makes people more attractive. Neptune is there, which makes him photogenic, and he's got Venus in that 1st house, which gives him that little bit of va-va-va-voom sex appeal. For a guy who otherwise looks kind of clownish. He really does have a funny face. Okay, so this is Vladimir Putin, the man, the myth, the legend. This is his chart on the right side. The Saturn-Uranus square in his chart is coming out of his 3rd house and his 7th. Now, it's pretty close. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, so it's with a node. It's pretty close to that 4th house. So again, home, family, his tribe, his national identity. These are the things that are really under critical tension right now, having a lot of stress test happening. Uranus in that 7th house also has a lot to do with not just his allies, but also his opponents. So on a global playing field, the people who are open adversaries or have an adversarial relationship to his country and or specifically to him are definitely, all of this is on the ropes. Like, he's feeling very, very sensitive, and it's very, because these are angular houses, this is very high tension wire sort of stuff. Now also too, his allies or his alliances are also, and here's what's interesting, they're also up for questioning, right? Because Saturn and Uranus are not in friendly relationship with each other. So Saturn in square to that Uranus in the 7th house also calls into question your, not comrades, but calls into question your companions, right? Your choice of companions, your choice of partnerships, your choice of business alliances, all the people you've been partnering with up to now and continue to partner with are the things that are really creating a tremendous amount of stress in your life. So he's really feeling it in terms of his choice of relationships, not just personally, but also professionally, because he is the leader of a country. And we saw what happened to Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, here's what's also very interesting. So remember, the trip point is going to be here, right? And it's going to fall in his 4th house. So in terms of the nation, his tribal family, the trip point is falling in that house that covers them. So something of significance for everyone that he considers part of his family is going to be up for grabs. Now, with that said, what ends up happening with this trip point, even though we've got this square happening with Saturn and Uranus, even though we have that, we've got a grand trine happening here. So the grand trine with the trip point 1 means that we're looking at something starting with Uranus, we're looking at something completely unexpected coming out of the blue, right? Something completely out of, like, talk about strokes of luck or opportunity. So something is going to come completely out of the blue and out of left field that's going to be favorable to him because of this grand trine, and because there's Venus involved. Not only could this bring him more wealth or more esteem or more love or more affection or more admiration from people around him, this could absolutely be something that benefits everyone and really elevates his status with the people around him, makes him much more loved, which he kind of needs right now because he's not the most loved person in the world. So, but all of this is going to be because of some break, some literally unexpected, out of the blue, lightning bolt, lucky break. Not sure what that is, but we're going to find out. So here, just because we want to investigate these things, right? So here is the actual chart of Russia as the most recent, in its most recent incarnation. So Russia takes this Saturn-Uranus square from the 7th and the 10th, right? Just out of the 6th, on the 6th house side actually, and the 10th. So the things that are under critical tension and stress right now, obviously, are one, their government, right? The leadership, as well as the civil servants, the people who work, that support the government. They're also, all of these things are at loggerheads with each other, because the 6th house, because that's where Saturn is coming out of the 6th. The 6th house represents service people, right? Your everyday grind people. So it's not just your cooks and your drivers and your garbage men and your housekeepers. It's also your journalists and your lawyers and your clerks at the lower levels, right? Your bank tellers. It's all the people who provide skill and service there as part of their employment. Now, so that's the T square, or not T square, good Lord, that's the Saturn-Uranus square. Now the trip point in the national chart for Russia is right here in the 8th house. So again, these are matters of money and loans and debts, right? And investments. So their mutual money with other people is coming under scrutiny and certainly being brought to the surface, okay? Now, this trip point trines Venus and Pluto. So at some level, in some way, they should find themselves becoming more attractive in terms of investment partners, which will be interesting. I'm not sure how that's going to work out or where that's coming from, because I honestly don't know that much about the country. But there's that. So along with that also too, and here, remember we said there was something surprising that's come out of the blue, like a lightning bolt unexpectedly for Putin, that's going to really endear him to his tribe or his people, right? Look at this. This trip point opposes the Jupiter of the national chart, and Jupiter is a lucky break. So, and again here we've got this thing about investment being attractive to investors. So over the next 6 months, if we're reading this correctly, one of the things I would expect to see happen is somehow, some way, Russia's going to get a boost or a boon to their economy because of investors from outside that are willing to partner with them or invest in them. But it will be something that will allow Russia to make more money. And Russia is a very poor country, in spite of having a lot of billionaires. It's like a handful of, Russia is what we are becoming. There's a handful of billionaires and everybody else is poor as dirt. In this particular case, whatever this is going to bring money and I'm assuming jobs with it, right? Into the economy, and it's going to give Putin an elevation in status or a boost, some type of redemption for him, and certainly be a lucky break and an improvement or a benefit to the Russian people. I don't know what that is. It would be interesting to see what that's about. So I looked up Russia really quick also, and by the way, if you go online, there's some really good stuff. In terms of, there's some really good stuff in terms of information about the country. So their natural resources, apparently they've got a huge amount of natural resources like oil, gas, minerals, gems, and coal, which would explain why Mitch McConnell loves them so much. But they have difficulty accessing this stuff. So apparently a large portion of this is under what is it they call it? Sub-freezing ground. So the ground is so frozen they can't get to it with the machinery that they have, because the machinery they have is very old and worn down and not strong or powerful enough to get to it. Subfrost, I don't remember. We can look it up. And also the other is that because Putin has been such a jerk, oh my God, like nobody wants to do business with him. Literally, it's like the damn Russian companies that own ambulance companies around here. They're so shady and underhanded. Nobody wants to work for them or do business with them, because you get burned once and nobody wants to do it twice. So, the whole Russian model of business is very different from other places. And because of Putin and the way they do business out there. Apparently, nobody wants to do business with them, so naturally they've got all kinds of sanctions on them, and people are not in any great rush to open up their wallets to these people, which is unfortunate because they're literally sitting on a gold mine of resources. But it doesn't do you any good because remember, all the money in the world doesn't translate into food if people won't let you buy stuff from them, or if you can't buy anything with it, right? But the next 6 months are going to be a turning point, so it will be interesting to see what happens with them. And of course, this brings us back to Joe Biden, because as I'm making this video, he is heading over he's in Europe right now, as a matter of fact, and he will be meeting with Putin at some point this week. Now, so one of the astrologers did mention that Biden apparently, let me get the thing here, Biden's Mars is conjunct Putin's Venus. So there's, obviously some speculation like, oh, I wonder if that means they'll be romantically attracted to each other, which I doubt. Maybe, I don't know. But what it does mean when you have Venus-Mars across charts between non-erotically inclined partners, meaning you've got like two heterosexual men or women with a Venus-Mars conjunction, they will not suddenly become bisexual. What will happen, because Venus is admiration and Mars is ambition, you will have somebody who has great admiration for the other person's assertiveness or ambitions. So Putin, for as much of a demon as he is, will instinctively have an admiration for the way Biden gets things done and the way Biden conducts himself. And I imagine after the useful idiot he just spent 4 years dealing with, anything that allows him to operate on a more sophisticated level, like he can actually play chess now instead of checkers, will be something admiration worthy. And I think in that regard, he will enjoy having an adult in the room to talk to, because it won't be as easy. And Putin likes challenges. So the reason I'm bringing this up now, and I haven't done Biden's chart because it's not time yet. It's not time. Is that while this trip point here is connecting to Putin's Venus, because Putin's Venus is conjunct Joe's Mars, these things now become interlocked together. So and remember, this is a 6-month window we're looking at. So I'm wondering what is going to happen between these two in terms of wheeling and dealing between them. So, President Biden has taken a very strong position about Russia and all this sort of stuff, which he should, and he needs to, just even if he doesn't mean it, he still has to do it for public relations. But my question now becomes, looking at these aspects moving forward for the next 6 months, what is going to happen between these two that might translate into us doing something for their benefit or something? But again, remember, whatever it is comes completely out of the blue, like a lightning bolt of opportunity for Putin. So I don't think this is pre-planned. But it will be interesting to see how this plays out in the end before these 6 months are over. So that's why I brought that up. Now, Biden takes this Saturn-Uranus out of his 3rd and his 5th. Now, I thought this was interesting. I'm not completely sure what to make of this. So with Saturn in the 3rd, he has to be extremely careful what he says, because everything he says is going to be measured, metered, criticized, analyzed, calculated. Like there's just no, he's not going to get a free pass on any verbal faux pas. So he really has to be on top of his game where that's concerned. Uranus squares that. And remember, Uranus is the stress test. And Taurus has to do with resources and money, and it's in his 5th house of children. So the sun, the sun that they had an issue with before, that they couldn't find anything, or it's got like some kind of ties to an oil company out in Ukraine or something like that. I don't remember what the sun's name is. But I'm wondering if this Saturn-Uranus square somehow isn't showing us something involving that sun and his finances and his business ties that will come up over the next 6 months. So let's keep an eye on that. In any event, if that is in fact the case, remember the trip point for Biden is here in the 4th house, the house of tribe and people. So over the next 6 months, his his relationship with his tribe, with his people, with the nation, is definitely going to be something that comes up as a huge flashpoint for him. Now, luckily, it's a trine to his Mars, so this should work, whatever it is, it should work to his advantage and in his favor. We don't see anything untoward about that. However, this is only a 6-month window, so we'll see what happens over the next 6 months. We'll see if the sun comes up as an issue over the next 6 months, and we'll see what on earth is going on between him and Putin before this is over in the next 6 months. So in his case, I don't see anything awful. We see where the stress patterns are, right? But that trip point down here is making really nice aspects, which means that this should be something favorable. And because it's coming out of the 4th house of family and tribe and the 11th house of unexpected circumstances. Hello, Taurus. Unexpected circumstances and random people and, you know, circumstances that just you can't predict, like completely out of the blue, lightning bolt, unexpected things. It is entirely possible that something will, like, literally bolt out of the blue that will really elevate Biden's status as well. So we'll see. We will see. So all of that is to say, wherever the trip point is in your chart, make sure you go take a look at it and understand that if you've got supportive aspects happening between other planets near that degree, then it should be good. You've got some good stuff coming, so take heart and have faith. If you've got challenging aspects set up with those degrees, don't panic. Don't panic. It means you're getting a report card shortly, right? And you just got to do the best that you can right now, act with lots of integrity, Saturn and Uranus, act with integrity, and do the best that you can, and understand that everything right now is about either taking the easy way out and sliding to the lowest common denominator, or the lowest of the low expressions, or committing yourself to working your way up to the gold standard of measurement for your life and the future. So, and the choice is always yours. So this slide I put here for all of my lovely ladies out there watching, just as a reminder, slut is attacking women for their right to say yes. Friend zone is attacking women for their right to say no. And bitch is attacking women for their right to call you on it. And all of this is to say, folks, we are all in this together. So save the criticisms in life for the people who are making the rules that you have to live by, but they don't, because that is where the real problem is. And for those of you who are interested, from now until November, I'm going to be doing, because this is an important, very critical time for all of us, I'm going to be doing a special. So if you would like some help sorting through and want someone to talk about it with, sorting through the Saturn-Uranus square in your chart, the trip point, maybe even setting up your chart if you don't have your chart already, I will offer these services specific to the Saturn-Uranus square and trip point for $10 by Zoom or Skype or email or everything short of carrier pigeon, whatever works best for you. Just send me an email, I'll give you the details. You can send the emails to me at primalgirlwellness@gmail.com. If you are one of my Patreon subscribers, this is free for you, so definitely get in touch with me by email and let me know, and we'll get you taken care of. All right, we'll talk to you guys later.